Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the afternoon Nearpod slash APcast. Today we're going to be doing day 4 of Urbanization. And with that, there's a couple of things you'll need to know. Firstly, you do have a bell ringer. It's currently popped up there once you click that link and type in for the Nearpod. And secondly, today you're also going to be you're going to learn a little bit more information, and you're going to be setting up part 2 of your urban planning project. Now, I had to go through a bit of a weird channel to do that. And the way I've got it done is I've got each of those maps set up with those coordinates on Nearpod Draw It. So towards the end, instead of doing a regular exit ticket or a quiz or such, I'm going to send you to the link to that other Nearpod. And with that one, you're going to choose the sites that, select the sites based on all the ones you've done. You should have already taken a look at it before, chosen your site. And then you're going to go ahead and start drawing your city on that area. Added bonus, I've also added the names of either the country or the state where the city is going to be in. So that should add another degree of difficulty because you have to think about a couple of things. For example, one of these is going to be on the border between Israel and Jordan. Needless to say, there's been a lot of turmoil over there. So if you're going to be building a city in this area, what are some of the things you're going to have to think about? Another one, it's a lovely area on the satellite view, but as it turns out, it's in the Sudan country of Sudan in Africa. So once again, you should remember back to when we did our projects on genocide, and there's a lot of political instability in Sudan. So when you build your city, you have to take that into consideration. How are you going to build your city so that it not only creates your city itself, but also is able to promote stability and peace in that area? So those are things you might want to think about as you're going forward. So you'll do those on there. I've got everything set up for you. I've also got the information posted on Google Classroom. It's another sheet, Microsoft Word sheet, just like normal. So you can go through there, fill out the sheet. The sheet also has extra instructions on it so that you can actually go ahead and start building your city. Your goal is so that your city it can sustain a population of at least 100,000 people. Now, 100,000 sounds like a really big number, but in the grand scheme of things for a city, it's kind of a small city. And the reason I say small city is a lot of us wouldn't think Baton Rouge is a major city, right? However, if you look at the population of Baton Rouge, there are over 400,000 people living in the Baton Rouge area. That's not just downtown, but that's also places like Airline Highway, Goodwood, Sherwood. All those areas combined, that Baton Rouge metro area, over 400,000 people. I believe it's about 460,000, which is almost 500,000, a little less than 500,000. So you have to take things like that into consideration. Your city's going to be kind of not too terribly huge, not going to be as big as Baton Rouge, but it needs to be able to sustain 100,000 people. That's your goal here. All right, so your bell ringer. I wanted you to think about some challenges that the city of Baton Rouge is currently facing. And what are some ways that Baton Rouge can respond to those challenges? Because Lord knows, a lot of us think about Baton Rouge, we think about the crime going on there. Well, the question is, what causes crime? How is Baton Rouge's setup, its economics, all of that, how does that go into Baton Rouge's high crime rate? So what are some things we're trying to do to help, not just, but put more police officers on the streets, but also trying to get it so that we can actually decrease crime by changing the environment a little bit. How can we do that? Nudge, nudge, hint, hint, wink, wink. We've talked about this before. In fact, we talked about this in the agriculture unit when we talked about food deserts. So how do you think something like that and growing your city, you can grow it in such a way to keep your city population stable, but also keep crime way down or as far down as you can get it? All right, so let's go ahead and see what some of your answers are. And Urbanization Day is actually Urbanization Day 4. It's like Muhammad answered it. Hey there, Muhammad. How you doing? Glad you're doing well. All right. Urbanization Day 4. Pull that up. And responses. Okay, so I'm seeing Ben has answered it, as well as Angel Molina. Welcome, welcome. No work. You have to pay. Vile house curfews. I'm not quite sure what you're meaning there, but it's fine. Another person says flooding, levels of wealth, homelessness. Well, hey, there's a couple of things you can do. In fact, we've been actually looking to get rid of some of those things. So one person says, put rules about not going out, avoid contact with people who do not leave, and authorities do something to deficiate. I'm not sure what that means. Everything, gradually restore everything to normal. Okay. The other person says creating more jobs to fix flooding and using more areas to create cheaper living areas. All right, so those are some good ideas. In fact, one of the biggest things with flooding right now is the Comey Diversion Canal, which they've just finally started resume building. So hopefully that can be done ASAP. And Comey Diversion is going to take all of this excess floodwater, rain runoff from Baton Rouge and actually be pushing it to the Comey River. And from there, it's going to go on to the Amite River and into Lake Maurepas. All right. So let's go ahead and move forward. So first thing we need to look at is one of our new themes, a new theory of urbanization, and this is called the Borchards epochs. I'll be completely honest with you guys. I've never heard of this guy, John Borchardt, before teaching this class. I don't even know if I'm getting his name right. Maybe it's Borchardt, but I'm going to go back to my Cajun French roots. I'm going to call him Borchardt or Bochet. Maybe it's Bochet. I don't know. I don't think he's from Lafayette, so he might not be Bochet. I'm just going to call him Borchardt. So Borchardt proposed that we can divide American urbanization into 5 different periods of time. And that's all based on how transportation methods are going to be changing during those areas. As you can see, I've put up this moving GIF image of a couple of guys in a boat, and they're rowing themselves out to a sailing ship, tall ship. I don't know what movie this is from, but apparently that tall ship has seen some better days. They need to get a few patches on their sails there because they're not going to be going anywhere too terribly fast. So let's look at our 5 epochs. The first one is this. Well, let me skip this one. I'm not a fan of this slide. I've actually put some motion slides on here. But these are the 5 and basic pictures, but let's dig deeper into them. So this is on slide 5. Our first one is called the sail wagon epoch. And this exists from about 1790 to about 1830. We have cities that spring up near ports and major waterways. And then if you're traveling inland, you're going to be using wagons. So most of our cities are either going to be directly on the coast, places like Boston, New York City, or they're going to be accessible by ship in some way. In the case of Washington, D.C., you can actually take your ship, sail it up the Chesapeake Bay and into the Potomac River. New Orleans is the same way. You sail your ship into the Gulf of Mexico, and then you find the mouth of the Mississippi River and sail up the river. Or if you're inland a little ways, you take a wagon within 1 or 2 hours from the coast by wagon. Places like Philadelphia, Atlanta. Actually, Philadelphia is a lot more than 1 or 2 hours. If I remember correctly, there's a book on John Adams. And when he traveled from Boston to Philadelphia, it took him about 2 weeks by wagon. But even then, the case still remains. Cities are growing near ports and waterways, and any cities outside of those ports and waterways are accessible within a short time period, relatively short time period, by a wagon. 1830 turns around, and lo and behold, we have a new item. Thanks to the the Industrial Revolution, we get a new item, and that is the steam engine. We have steam technology now. On the Mississippi River, we have steamboats. There's a reason that a lot of these settlements on the river never went too far past New Orleans, maybe Baton Rouge. Because let's face it, in those cases, you're trying to get a wind-propelled ship up the Mississippi River. Sometimes you can only make it to New Orleans because guess what? The river's flowing, and if the river's got a heavy flow to it, it's going to push you back down. In fact, during the Battle of New Orleans, one of the things the Americans and the French had going for them, well, French, Jean Lafitte, is that while the British were trying to sail up the river, there was actually a high current, and it started pushing the British back down the river. So the British had to depart their troops out in Chalmette because they couldn't make it to New Orleans. They couldn't just sail up to the city itself because the river was far too fast and flowing far too hard for them. But this is called the Iron Horse epoch. And the Iron Horse we're talking about is going to be the steam train. So steamships allow us to travel up and down rivers. We start seeing more river cities popping up, places like Memphis, places like St. Louis, because we're taking these steamboats up and down the Mississippi River. We have steam trains. However, our steam trains are usually small and regional. Say there could be a steam train running from, say, Houston, Texas to Mobile, Alabama, and that would be it. It doesn't go all the way across the country yet. So regional steam railroads and steam ships, paddle wheelers going up and down the rivers. Next slide. The steel rail epoch from 1870 to about 1920, so about 50 years here. We finally have rail travel going from sea to shining sea. You can, in theory, get on a train in New York and be in California within 7 days. So we've got the Transcontinental Railroad, and rail is just moving side to side, East Coast, West Coast, and everything in between. So that's the steel rail, and trains become the main source of transportation at this period. However, in the 1920s, we start seeing automobiles. This is called the auto air amenity epoch from about 1920 to 1970. Automobiles come into fashion. We start developing car culture. Travel by airplane. We start, the Wright brothers in early 1900s, they had the first flight. By the 1920s, we've actually got flying becomes a big thing. In fact, after World War II, flying becomes a predominant way for people to go from one side of the nation to the other. Instead of taking you 7 days to get from New York to California, now you can actually do it within 5 hours. Of course, you'd have to make stops every so often because planes can only carry so much fuel, but you can do this within hours instead of days. Case in point, last summer when I went to that teacher seminar, I left Baton Rouge. It took me about an hour and a half to go from Baton Rouge to Charlotte, North Carolina. It's insane how fast planes go. So insane that they've actually started replacing trains as the main mode of transportation cross country. Automobiles. You're not having to take a regional train. If you wanted to go to, say, Gulf Shores, Alabama for the day, well, guess what? In the 1920s and 30s, if you wanted to go to Gulf Shores, you'd have to get on the train in New Orleans and take the train from New Orleans to Mobile, Alabama. However, with automobiles, you can just leave straight from your house. Pack up, drive to Gulf Shores, spend Saturday there, drive home on Sunday morning. So now we're really moving along. And our fifth epoch is high technology. And I love this GIF image here. Cars become more reliable, more efficient. You can drive further on a single tank of gas. Passenger airplanes develop jet propulsion. They develop new types of planes that can carry more people. Unfortunately, that means you also have to have less leg room on those planes. Tell you the truth, when I was sitting on that plane from Baton Rouge to Charlotte, I had a window seat and I was literally sitting like this because it was a smaller plane and there was a bit of a curve to it. If I sat straight up, my head would be right, going through the paneling there. So I was sitting like this the entire time. It was not very comfortable, but for an hour and a half, and I'll take it. We also have new advancements in computers and technology. We can start sharing information more quickly from other people. And this helps our urbanization grow. Because let's face it, guys, if you cannot communicate with a city or travel to a city, that city is essentially going to be dead, right? I would think so. So let's see who's on here. Who all is on? Shout it out. All right. Now, those are these 5 epochs, and those are going to be really important to know. So once again, we'll go back to the first. First is going to be sail and wagon. Second is going to be iron horse, which is going to be steam technology. Personally, I would have called it the steam epoch or the steampunk epoch, but they call it iron horse. Then we have steel rail. By the way, another great thing about steel rail is that we start using less in steam. We start developing diesel locomotives, diesel engines, and we can travel a lot more efficiently from point A to point B. Then we have the auto air amenity epoch. Cars come into fashion, and airplane travel starts replacing trains. And lastly, high technology. Cars become more reliable, more efficient. Passenger airplanes now have jet propulsion, and new advancements in computers and technology allow us to share information more quickly, and we can also travel a lot faster from place to place. In fact, during this time, 1969, you know what happens? We land on the moon. And ever since that, the moon landing, we have had an almost constant presence in space. It started in the early 1950s, in the early 1960s, with the space race. We put 1 or 2 people up there, but we never had that constant presence. However, after 1969 and the moon landing, we now have a constant presence in space. We've got the International Space Station today. Before that, we had the Mir Space Station. Before that, we had Skylab. By the way, watch out, Skylab was falling. Yeah, you think it's weird with coronavirus. In the 1980s, Skylab broke up in orbit. And pieces of Skylab were coming down, and people were trying to file lawsuits because they claimed to be hit by pieces of Skylab falling from space. Needless to say, they were all full of crap. All right, next one up. This is slide number 8. Have my coffee for the day. Urban deterioration. Now, here's what we get into where we have some major problems when it comes to urbanization. And that is the line between rich and poor, or rather wealthy and less than wealthy. Because I think by most stretches of the imagination, I would be considered part of the poor class. Even though I have a good job and I make pretty good money, I am still technically, because I make less than $50,000 a year, I'm still technically, I think, in that poor class. So we have what's called redlining. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this right now. Redlining is illegal. However, it still happens. Redlining is when financial institutions, banks, credit unions start drawing lines on the map to show places they will not lend money. This is technically illegal. However, it still goes on because it's one of those things that if they have a justification for why they're not building a bank in a certain area, it's very hard to prove that they're being discriminatory in that sense. It's kind of a weird nebulous thing. Technically, this is very much illegal. Now, because banks do not want to do business in these areas, we see an abundance of payday loan shops coming up. If you've ever heard of Checking the Cash, Speedy Cash with the stupid kangaroo mascot, Speedy Cash, Quick Cash, people who cannot spell quick correctly but want to lend you money. These payday loan areas are kind of a blight. And this is one of the first things that starts causing you to have deterioration in these urban areas. If people cannot have access to a bank or a credit union, they cannot start saving money. They cannot, be part of the money in the monetary process. So instead of banks and credit unions to lend money, they go to these payday loan places. Now, you could be working 40 hours a week. And if you have an accident, let's say you break your arm somehow, and you have to go to the hospital. Well, guess what? The hospital, even if you have insurance, hospital still needs you to pay up right then and there. You do have to have a bit of a copay. So without a bank or a credit union, you're forced to go to these payday loan places. They lend you the money, but their rates are through the roof. So by the time you have your next payday, guess what? You're not buying food anymore. You're using that to pay off the old payday loan. And if you can't pay it off, what a lot of people end up doing is taking out a second payday loan in order to pay off the first. So they get stuck in a cycle of debt. Needless to say, if a person is stuck in one of these debt cycles, they're not going to be getting out of it very soon. Just got a message here. Yeah. Sorry. Because these banks do not want to go to these areas, people are stuck in cycles of debt. And if you can't really pay for anything, you're having to pay back these payday loan places, what happens next? Well, we have public housing. People cannot afford to buy a house or even rent a house. So they're stuck with these low income, these speedy cash places. And what we see after that is an appeal for public housing, which is government built housing or government sponsored housing for low income households. Now, here's our issue with public housing. It's considered to be unsafe because when you have these public housing projects, we actually see a number of local law enforcement start trying to ignore those places. And the reason they're ignored is because in a lot of people's views, you know what? This is a government project house. It's paid for with federal dollars. These people are not paying into the system. So in that case, the government needs to come in and police it. So it's largely ignored by places, police, fire, and other services. And because it's ignored, crime starts flourishing. In many cases, public housing actually forms its own ethnic neighborhood. We've already talked about ethnic neighborhoods before when we talked about ethnicity. And we saw, got another message here. And we saw how different people will come from different areas and kind of set up their own places like Chinatown, where Asian immigrants will congregate and they'll have their own ethnic area, and their ethnicity thrives. However, in a lot of cases, we're actually seeing public housing forming its own ethnic neighborhoods. Sometimes they are people who are down on their luck. In a case, maybe they're born here in the United States, African American, Latino American. Maybe they are immigrants who simply don't have the money to be able to get a decent house somewhere. So they go to these look for public housing because it's low income houses. They work 40 plus hours a week, and then they have to find something that's subsidized by the government. So we're seeing a slip here, this deterioration. I'm sorry, I'm starting to slur a little bit. Now this slide is number 10 on our slide deck. It's New York City. And the first side of it, on the left-hand side, you're actually seeing predominant races and ethnicities by different tracts of land. So the places in blue, shades of blue here, whether it's dark blue, light blue, those are mostly going to be predominantly white areas. The places in red are predominantly African American, predominantly Black. In the orange areas, orange and yellow is predominantly Hispanic, and green is predominantly Asian. Now, at the same time, if you look at it's the same map, just with another overlay on it. This one's separated by the boroughs of New York, and you're seeing everything from Manhattan, Staten Island, Long Island. And this is actually by median household income. The places with darker blue is going to be places with a lot more debt. These are people, those shades of blue, those first two, is people making $25,000 a year or less. I'm sorry, it's $35,000 or less. It's kind of blurry on my screen here, and I'm also not wearing my contacts today. $35,000 or less. And you can see there's a bit of a racial overlap here. Case in point, that big dark blue area, 35,000 or less, and kind of on the top end, that north end of the map on the right. If you look at the map on the left, that is mostly Hispanic Puerto Ricans. Now, African Americans on this one are also kind of feeling a bit of a pinch as well, because if you look south, that top island area, That's where Manhattan is. So that kind of that long, almost like a finger reaching down or a thumb reaching down, that's Manhattan. Predominantly white, and as you can see on there, it's predominantly wealthy. But at the same time, just across the river, the Hudson River from it, you've got this large blue area. There's green all around it, but there's blue in the center. And if you look at the map on the other side, you're going to see that is largely African American, largely black. So, needless to say, these places with these low median household incomes are also going to be places where you're going to see a lot of those government project housing, those low income housing projects. All right, next slide. Now, here's the thing. In the United States, we have some form of, we have some form of organization to it. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain fart there. I had to think of the word. However, in other places, they're not quite so fortunate. They don't have the same amount of organization. And in these mega city places, we have squatter settlements. These are informal communities. They have no legal ties to the land. They're also kind of thrown up as these shanty towns. They don't have essential services that are needed for daily life. In Brazil, Brazil is typically known for having the most common version called favelas. And with these favelas, we're actually seeing a lot of people cram almost on top of each other. They're throwing up houses based on whatever trash they can find. Things that were discarded from the city. If they find that, say, a building was torn down and there's a bunch of lumber or a bunch of sheetrock, they'll take that and they'll repurpose it and use it to build these apartment buildings in these little shanty towns. Places like Rio de Janeiro. In fact, the picture you're seeing on the screen here is a shanty town, one of these favelas from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Bangkok, Cairo, Lagos, Mumbai. All these places have these same squatter settlements. In the case of Brazil, believe it or not, Brazil, a lot of people think about the United States and the slave trade and such, and how slavery wasn't ended until 1865. Well, slavery actually lasted for another 23 years in Brazil. And after emancipation, after slavery was made illegal in Brazil, all these former slaves, they had nothing. So they went out to go form their own settlements. And the settlement we got were the favelas, because they were using what little bit they could find to go ahead and build shelters. And that's what we get, what we see here. Now, on the next slide, here's actually 4 images from favelas around the world. I think most of these are from Central America, though. The top one is, I think the top one is Mombasa, Africa, the top left. The other 3 are from Central America. So as you can see, there's a lot of graffiti, a lot of trash. In the case at the bottom, you've got the police forces making patrols there, and they're all armed because there's such a gang violence problem in these areas. So that's what we end up having here with these really low places. They have no legal ties to the land. They have no income. And a lot of these people are just living for generations. Maybe your grandfather built this shanty in this favela, and your grandfather's since passed away. You're moved into it, and you've got children. So this is a major problem for these mega cities. A lot of trash, a lot of despair. Slide 13. So this is a Collaborate board. I'm going to turn this on. Approve student messages. What can we do? What can and what should cities do about these massive squatter settlements? What's the solution here? So for those of you on Nearpod PS, you can actually click that link and join in. For the two of you who are watching right now, I don't know who's watching, but I know someone's there watching. Let's see. I'm pretty sure Mizell is on, because I know Mizell is usually. All right. No one wants to say anything. All right. So the post-it board. Now the good news is these collaborate boards have actually been changed over so that you can actually do them on student paced. However, I do still have to go in and make sure that I'm double checking it and making sure that those student you're posting things that are appropriate, school appropriate. So I'll be going there looking at that one shortly. All right. So slide number 14. Here's one thing that cities can do, and that is called zoning. A city can designate land for different purposes, such as residential areas, business areas, or manufacturing areas. What zoning does is it sets up legal protections for certain areas of land. For example, if an industry needs to have a fresh water source nearby, well, the city can actually come up and set up a zone for that one and say, look, we know you need fresh water, but we want you to get it from the city water supply. We don't want you taking it from a natural water source. Because once you have an industry, a factory building next to a river, the odds become greater that factory runoff or maybe some pollution will be getting into the river. So this is how cities can actually start protecting those waterways and protecting the natural environment. Also, think about it this way. Let's say you have your own house, you're residential. You've got some neighbors around you, their own houses. But then one day, a major company like we'll do, what's the people that make that pill? Well, use a chemical company, Merck, MERCK. Merck decides that they want to build a factory right next to where you're living. Needless to say, you don't want that next to you, because with that factory, you're going to have some pollution. You're going to have the loss of a lot of land. You're also going to have a lot of traffic around your house of these workers who are driving to and from the factory. So with zoning, you can actually zone, a city can zone certain areas, or even the parish can zone certain areas, or even the states, and say, hey, you know what? We're not going to have any manufacturing here. We're not going to have any business here. We just want this area, piece of land, to be residential. And that helps everyone out. There's a lot of issues with zoning in Livingston Parish because you see a lot of people trying to throw up these businesses in residential areas. One of the things that happened not too long ago, in fact, just about a year and a half ago, was Dollar General in Walker, Louisiana. Dollar General wanted to build a Dollar General store at the front of a small subdivision in Walker. The people in the subdivision didn't want it. They protested it. They wrote letters to the city, stop this, and you have to stop it. But here's the thing, Walker didn't have any zoning in place. So all the Walker City Council could tell them was, if you don't want Dollar General there, buy the land yourself. And as a result, Dollar General snatched up the land, built the Dollar General store on top of it, and now all these people have to drive past Dollar General that they did not want while they're trying to get to their house. So zoning is a major thing that you have to take seriously, because if you don't, that allows anyone to do whatever they want with the land anywhere they want. If they have the money to do it, they'll do it. In fact, I'm actually pushing for zoning laws for certain areas in Livingston Parish that would actually be places of wildlife protection areas to keep the trees, keep the forests, because we've had so many subdivisions going up. We're now seeing instances of coyotes because what's happening is across South Louisiana, and really all of Louisiana and Mississippi, there was always this heavy coyote population, wild dogs. But as all this development is happening, these coyotes are actually getting flushed into neighborhoods because they're chopping down forests to build neighborhoods there. And that's the areas where these coyotes were. So it's actually been a major problem, major issue. And people like to complain about it. And the only thing I can say is, hey, you build these subdivisions, this is what happens. Because they're wanting to develop these areas, but they're not wanting to pay attention to the actual land around it and see what's going on with the land around it, why these woodlands are necessary. Another idea is called gentrification. This is a process where middle-class people move into inner-city neighborhoods and start renovating those neighborhoods. It's part of a broader scheme called urban renewal to clear and redevelop these urban slum areas. Now, this picture on your screen you're seeing is actually one that people who've lived around Baton Rouge for years, since the 1980s, are rather familiar with. This was part of the Jimmy Swaggart Bible College. And it's down, if you were to travel down to the Mall of Louisiana, there's a large tower. And for at least 20 years, maybe even 30 years, I know it was there as long as I lived in this area. Whenever you went to the Mall of Louisiana, you'd have to, towards the south end of the mall where Macy's and Dillard's is, you would end up seeing this giant, gray, nasty-looking building. What it was back in the 1980s, they had Jimmy Swaggart, as a televangelist, preacher guy. He decided to build a Bible college, a private college in Baton Rouge. And naturally, with any college, you're going to need to have dorms for your people to live in, your students to live. So he starts building these dorms, and that's what this building is. It was this nice big dorm. However, while this was being built, Jimmy Swaggart, just like a lot of televangelists back, he got caught doing some shady things, including, from what I've heard, stealing money from his organization so he could live the high life based on people's, giving offerings and donations to his church, as well as he was caught up in a bit of a scandal, including an underage woman. At least I think she was underage. I don't know. Either way, big scandal. And what happened was this entire building, this college, shut down. So they stopped building it. The college eventually, as far as I know, recovered. It's more of an activity center these days. I don't know if they still do college credits or whatnot. But for years, for 30 years, this building sat empty, just nasty looking. They tried to keep the stuff. They kept promising that they were going to finish it someday, but they never did. And eventually, people were going inside and tagging it. There's graffiti all over it. However, not too long ago, a company called Renaissance Hotels said, you know what, we're going to buy this. And they did. And you can still drive past it today. It's the Renaissance Hotel next to the Mall of Louisiana. But as you can see, that's what it originally looked like. It was empty and abandoned for all these years. And then the Renaissance Hotel bought it, finished it, and turned it into a hotel and convention center. Not a bad deal. Not bad for anyone. It helps put money back into the area. It helps reduce that blight and have this nasty looking abandoned building which, by the way, I thought would have made a really kick-ass paintball area. But I was thinking of paintball back then. But Renaissance bought it out. They renovated it and they turned it into this really nice luxury, semi-luxury hotel. Now, that's one of the good things that gentrification can do. You take these nasty, blighted areas, you clean them up, you repurpose them, and you try to get more people coming in and spending more money. However, there's been a bit of a pushback against this. So think about some pros and cons. What are the pros of gentrification? What are the bad things about gentrification? And what happens if you're in an area and you're trying to renovate this area, but there are already people living there? What do you think they might think? You can go ahead and pause the video right now and pause the video, answer this question, and then you'll be able to go forward. And once you've submitted it, you can go ahead and go forward, and we'll take a look and see what they think. So go ahead and pause now. Come back as soon as you're done answering this one. As for the rest of us, we'll move on. So here's some pushback against gentrification. And they did it with graffiti. Gentrification, just say no. Gentrification, a process by which middle-class people take up residence in a traditionally working-class area of the city, changing the character of the area. Another one, this other graffiti says, don't be pushed out. So they're pushing back against, they bought this area, this blighted area. They're trying to build this new subdivision, and someone graffitis it and says, don't be pushed out. And at the top, you're seeing the gentleman protesting. He's holding a sign, gentrification displaces low-income residents. So here's our issue. We have a bit of a culture clash. We've got low-income people who are risking losing their homes in favor of this gentrification scheme. What do you think? Is it good or is it bad? I mean, it's bad that they're losing their homes, but hey, if their house is running down and just falling apart around them, what do you do? It's a hard question to answer because you're of two minds about this. One, you have to get a more steady tax base. No businesses are going to want to open in an area where the houses are all run down and falling apart. At the same time, you don't want to run people off. They have certain rights, their private property rights. So that's kind of your issue there. Whenever I saw Mayor Sharon Weston Broome on television talking about blighted properties, I'm like, you know what? If I had the money, I would go out, buy a bunch of these blighted properties, fix them up, and then sell them. Make a little bit of a profit there. Buy this blighted house. It's a house that's fallen down. It's maybe on a half acre of land. Tear that house down, build a new house. It's maybe, $50,000, $60,000 for the house itself. Then, deck it out with nice lights and cabinets and all that stuff, and then sell it for $100,000. $100,000 house, easy peasy. I do something good for the community. I make a little bit of profit when I sell it. However, you have some issues. What happens to the other people? Who's going to come in and buy that house? What if I do it in a place in a part of Baton Rouge where there's a shooting or rampant crime happening? Am I going to be able to sell it? Well, that's a bit of a problem too, because guess what? Now I have this house I cannot sell that no one's living in. And if I don't go in there and try to maintain this house, then it could end up falling apart just like the one I've replaced. So there's a bit of a culture clash here. Number 19. So the underclass, inner city residents, because of all these factors we're talking about, they're trapped in a cycle of economic and social problems. There's poor public service, places without a lot of health services, not a lot of hospitals. Education is not doing too hot. Police is not doing too hot. Maybe there's no police force at all. Maybe the police force has a negative reputation with the people that they're trying to watch out for. Now, if there's no education, then there's not going to be any good jobs coming in. If there's no good jobs in that area, there's no money. And if there's no money, people start turning to crime to get money. Crime becomes more appealing. Let's face it. If there is an area where you're going to have jobs for the asking, even if it's working as a cashier at a grocery store, but you're doing 40 hours a week there and you're doing pretty good. It's not great, but it's good. It's keeping you, a roof over your head. Well, if that job isn't there, then what happens when someone says, hey, you want to make some easy money? I got this stuff you can sell for me. And they hand you drugs. Guess what? You're into crime now. Not so much because you wanted to be, but because you were desperate. It takes, money to buy essential items that you need. And without any money, no jobs to provide that money, crime becomes appealing. All right, number 20. So here's our consequence from this. We have an eroding tax base. We have low income areas. We get fewer tax dollars coming in from taxes. Because of those fewer taxes, we are having to cut back on essential services, hospitals, police, fire. So to raise tax revenue, you need to start attracting businesses into these areas. Some governments do that with what's called subsidies. They pay government money to these people, invite them to come in with businesses. We also invite gentrification, try to get middle-class people into these areas to go ahead, buy these houses or apartment buildings, fix them, live there, spend your money there. In some really terrible areas, you might see people forcing the poor to leave. If they're elderly, they're trying to get them into retirement communities or nursing homes to take over these areas, force them out. So we actually see, once again, that same clash of culture clash happening in those same areas once again. So how do we break the cycle of poverty? On your screen, you'll be seeing the actual the Collaborate board. And I will be, once again, have this open for any students who want to do this on the student PACE version. So to help break the cycle of poverty, you need to increase the number and the quality of services in the inner city. But that costs money. So what do you think we should do? Should we start gentrifying these areas? Bring in middle-class areas, try to give subsidies for people to build businesses there? Should we try to run out these areas? So here's our poverty cycle. If you click on that picture there, we have socioeconomic status. Well, to gain socioeconomic status, you need to have affordable education, access to education. That gives you job opportunities, and then that can actually help boost your status. But if those job opportunities aren't there, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have any change there. So this is our poverty cycle. You have to improve one of these to improve everything else. Let's go forward. Number 22. Now, cities are now pushing for what's called new urbanism. So we've seen what causes urban deterioration. So with new urbanism, we start planning and developing, approaching planning and development based on the principles of how cities and towns have been built for the last centuries. However, new urbanism plans for things like walkable blocks. In other words, making sure that there are sidewalks. It's an easy place for foot traffic, so you're not having to drive everywhere. Housing and shopping in close proximity to each other, so that if you are living in an area and you need to go grocery shopping, well, you can easily get to your grocery stores within 5-10 minutes. Accessible public spaces is another one that you need. Green places, parks, beautification. Not just because it looks nice, but also green areas can help reduce stress in the population. And then many times it can also help reduce crime in a population. Well-maintained city parks, places that have, maybe there's a gate around it, maybe there's just police patrolling it or security patrolling it, because that can actually help you grow your city and help reduce crime. No one wants to go to a place where there's no public parks, no places where their kids are going to be able to play. Maybe go fly a kite during the spring. P.S. Now's a good time to fly a kite. Have you been outside? Oh my God, it's beautiful out there. But anyway, public spaces, green areas can reduce stress, can also help reduce crime. So here are some goals of new urbanism. Walkability, how fast you're able to get from point A to point B without using any types of vehicles. You can just walk from place to place. Connectivity, how close you are to not only your neighbors, but also your motorcycle going down the road, but also your grocery stores, your necessities, your essentials, fire stations, police stations, mixed use buildings, not just have a building that just build an entire building just for one single store. What a lot of people are doing nowadays is they'll have this building with multiple levels, maybe 3 stories. The bottom would be the grocery store. The top 2 would be apartment buildings. So you're able to keep people really close. Another goal is diversity, making sure that people can have all their needs met, whether they're young, old, no matter what their race or ethnicity is, or their income level. Better architecture. Harper, it's my dog. Harper. No, it's Gabby. And it's both of them. Come here, Gabby. Hey. Oh, come here. That's what I have to deal with. All right. Better architecture, more architectural styles, things that flow more with nature. Traditional neighborhood structures is another thing. Let's face it, guys, in a traditional neighborhood in the 1950s and 60s, you knew who your neighbors were. How many of us can say that nowadays? I mean, I can, but then again, my neighbors are all going to be family members on this little farm area here. Beyond that, I don't know who lives down the street. I don't care to, but I don't know who they are. So they're trying to promote more social interaction, which is kind of ironic that I'm saying that during this coronavirus and we're all supposed to be socially distant. No, I don't have corona. Sorry. We have increased density, trying to get people together in one area, trying to prevent this suburban sprawl from taking over all these other areas. Green transportation, trying to find ways to make, your transportation from the city center to the outskirts to where you're living as energy efficient, as environmentally friendly as possible. We actually saw green transportation the other day with the Walt Disney Epcot City, where he had those people movers going from these suburb areas, and you could take the people mover to get to downtown so you can go to work. That way, you didn't need to have your car because you had these people mover stations, small trains that you can catch the train at the station and go downtown to work. And lastly, sustainability, because you have to take all this together and make sure that your entire community is as sustainable as possible. We actually see this in places like New York and Boston, where a number of skyrises are actually starting to grow gardens on their rooftops. They're building these different buildings, newer ones, with rooftop gardens. So not only do you have a place that can actually start producing more oxygen to help fight pollution in the air, but let's say you're working on 42nd Street in New York City. Well, lunchtime comes, you can go up to the roof and spend your time in this garden park that's on the roof of the building. So that's all these things that go into the new urbanism, trying to get all this stuff together, making sure you can create a really great city for the future. All right, so here's our last little bit, Urban Planning Project Part 2. The next slide I put up will actually take you to a student-paced Nearpod Draw It presentation. I've posted the instructions for Part 2 on Google Classroom to help you with this. So you're going to be selecting your location from the Urban Planning Project Part 1 and start drawing your city. You should have had, as you've been reading over Part 1, you should have some information and some understanding and idea of how you want to draw the city. So it would help immensely if you have a computer mouse to plug into your Chromebook, because doing it with a touchpad, it's kind of wonky. So be sure to use everything you've been learning in this unit so far when it comes to planning. Make sure that you are trying to grow your population to at least 100,000 people. So you might want to look back at our other Nearpods about what you can do to increase your area. In fact, that first one, that city planner thing I think we did, where, hey, if you chose to have a hospital, increase your population by this much. Take a look at that one, because that can help you out a little bit. So your goal is to create a city with a population of at least 100,000 people. Now, here's the thing. I went ahead and put the real world locations on there, because that's going to really come into play. You have to take some of those informations on the demographics of the area seriously about this, because I can tell you right now, it's a lot easier to start a city I've got one of them that's in Minnesota, and I've got one of them in Nevada, not too far from Las Vegas. It's easier to start a city in those two places than it would be in somewhere like Sudan or on the border between Israel and Jordan. So I've put some notes on there for that, and just told you where, for each one I told you where it is, and I want you to kind of take that into consideration. What challenges you're going to have to face here. Because let's face it, if you're building in, say, Sudan, you're probably going to be experiencing more of these favela type settlements. And what's your plan to deal with that? All right, guys, so that's going to end it for the day. Once again, you'll go to, once you get through this one, that last one takes you to the screens for the Draw It for the City Project Part 2, City Planning Project. Ideally, if this were in class, we would actually be doing this on actual maps inside the classroom, and you'd actually be able to pull out your, pull out your poster with your group and draw it from there. However, given our circumstances, we're actually doing this on the computer. All right, so peace, love, applesauce, all that good stuff. And I'll be broadcasting again on Friday at 2:00. Have fun, get your enrichments done, and see you then. Bye-bye for now.